if music is the food of love, then the games based on that music are truly the enema of hate, because most of these aren't very good. But yeah, this is a collection of old videos I did based on musicians that had computer games. Take it away, old me, as we start off with the breast video that I could do. Yes. Boys, 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 I'm looking for a good time. Boys, 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 I'm ready for some fun. So, boys, 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 it'll have to be after I played Sabrina the computer game, as it's neither fun nor a good time. Real Generic Demon, his channel up there, asked me if I could do a series based on games to do with pop stars. And so I decided to do it, and of course I decided to start with the lowest common denominator game possible, because that is how I roll. Sabrina Salerno, Italian singer, songwriter, record producer, actress, television presenter and glamour model. So yes, a lot of strings to her bow. She's known most in this country though for three things: the single Boys, Summertime Love, and, well, them. Though she had a string of hits across the continent, it was Boys, Summertime Love that caught the consciousness of the British public. A light, sexually charged dance hit earworm that soared to number 3 in the space year of 1987. No doubt aided by a video that consists of more wardrobe malfunctions than an IKEA shelf assembly cupboard put together by a blind chimp with broken hands. If I cut out every moment of Sabrina either swinging up and down her momentous mammaries out of her useless swimsuit, or every time a hint of areola is displayed, as seen in the video wouldn't be very long at all. With the salacious content intact, the video is this long, and without the exposed yams or urgent pullings up, the video is this long. As you can see, there's a lot of titty on display. Sabrina continued to have hits on the main continent, largely because European folk in the 1980s had very questionable music taste. Sabrina's success was substantial enough for Spanish software house IBA to grab her by her licenses and get fellow Spaniards Genesis Software to put together an effort for 1,200 pesetas in 1989 for the MSX, the Amstrad CPC and the ZX Spectrum. Released solely, by the way, on the non-Portuguese bit of the Iberian Peninsula, otherwise known as Spain. The game consists of a scrolling beat-em-up, albeit on a single plane, with Sabrina's storyline being suitably mental. Listen to this. The game features the eventful journey that a popular singer, Sabrina Salerno, must suffer to be able to be transferred from the airport to the nearest television studios. In order to arrive there, she must cross a town whose inhabitants seem to be a little disconformed with her way to be, act, and mainly to dress. Your mission will be to guide Sabrina in an arduous way, avoiding or eliminating as many enemies as possible. There are of several kinds, although all of them have an aspect in common. They are normal people of whom can be found in the street in the dozens. Thus, for example, the typical housewives, the knifer, the aggressive punker, the exorcist priest, the old woman with her cane, and others of citizen tropisms. I haven't, by the way, changed the language anyway. I think this has been put through Google Translate from the Spanish release, and it makes it even better in my opinion. But hey ho, pick the bones out of that, why don't thee? Sabrina has chosen a hostile environment for a top-heavy starlet to perform in. Not only does the poor old duck have to totter her titters about on high heels due to a lack of cabs at the airport, but every single member of the population of this town seems hell-bent on spilling Solano's blood on the paving slabs. Well, apart from the man running hell-bent with his hands at mammary level. But the psychological damage of his molestation can cause Sabrina just as much pain as the old lady's cane, the gutter snipe's knife, or the careless terrorist who leaves his bombs lying around outside suburban terraces. Quite why there is this much over-the-top hatred to the ginormously jugged Genoese japester isn't overly clear. Boys wasn't a great track, I'll admit, but come on guys, this is too much. That spiel in the plot about them being a little disconformed doesn't even make sense. What does that mean? The enemies, as numerous and as frustratingly random as they are at appearing, can be dealt with in a number of ways. A quick kick to the shins, a slap to the face, and, of course, why not, a triumphant swing of the lung cover 1 and 2. And each of these attacks are the only attacks that can be used on particular enemies, which sort of turns it into a lo-fi guitar controlless version of Rock Band. In fact, you have to press the right button at the right time, only instead of playing notes on a scrolling bar to the time of music, you're an 80s pop star fiercely jabbing her nipple into the eye of a knife maniac. In theory, this could work, but the villains appear completely at random and can be in clumps of different enemies. And as you can't kick someone below the kneecap and thrust your chest beefers at the same time, you try it, you're left with an extraordinarily infuriating and poor effort and a quick turnaround in the time between you starting the game to finishing it. I had to actually nab quite a bit of footage from RZX Archive because I got hopelessly stuck at screen 4. I will put a link up there to say thank you because I'm useless at games. Sabrina's game then, it starts with some distorted speech as she stands monochromatically proud in an unnamed European city. Areola perfectly keeping on brand by escaping its pathetically ineffective fabric prison, just a few feet though, in front of a poster of herself straight up topless. I somehow doubt I'll get in trouble with YouTube for showing this. The game, it then meanders through a short, poorly programmed tit-em-up before a climactic slapping bitch fight with the town harlot. I don't know who she is. She clearly doesn't like Sabrina, but she can match her breast thrust for knee kick. There really is nothing more of note to be said. As I said right at the beginning, this is a very low common denominator way to start a new series. As there was no UK release, I can't give you review scores, but I think it's safe to say Sabrina, she's got her knockers.
Doctor, doctor, can't you see I'm burning? Why, yes, I can, sir. You know the drill. Bug off home for 2 weeks, wash your hands a lot, and try not to die, old Sam. Yes, this is topical humour right at the start of a video, guaranteed to age it, but hell, we're talking about the Thompson Twins. It's not like they're still on the tip of tongues in the 3rd decade of the 21st century, is it? Originally formed in Sheffield in 1977 as a new wave group, the trio of Yorkshireman Tom Bailey, New Zealander Alana Curry and Londoner Joseph Leeway had featured many lineup changes and alterations before finding their feet with a more mainstream pop sound around 1983, scoring a string of hits across the world, most notably here in the UK and the US. It's highly likely that you'll remember a couple of their hits at least, the most enduring being Doctor Doctor and Hold Me Now, a sing-along love story about the emotionality of reuniting after a conflict. And yes, I hadn't forgotten, they are indeed named after the Thompson Twins from Tintin, but I don't think much about Tintin, not after they did that creepy CGI animated film in the early 2010s. Yeesh.
The band continued to evolve and change lineups, changing their name in the 1990s to Babel, but they never quite got back to their mid-80s heyday in terms of popularity, and eventually they split in 1996. Onto the Game and Quicksilver, the guys behind Max Headroom that I covered recently, coded this short text adventure for the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum in 1984. And, well, its storage medium and method of distribution were unusual, to say the least, and probably the most interesting part of this game. Not as unusual, though, as Alana Curie's hair throughout the 1980s. The game was released on a flexi disc. Now, for any younger viewers, a flexi disc is a less rigid version of a vinyl record. For any younger viewers, a vinyl is a bit like an MP3, but it's a large black disc that comes in a paper sleeve that certain middle-aged men revere like a god, saying it sounds better, using words that don't necessarily make sense, like it sounds earthier or warmer, which don't describe sound at all. And those things used to play music. Now, for any younger viewers, music is an arranged collection of sounds, a byproduct of hitting one thing against another thing to create something beautiful. Have I been thorough enough with this? Good. But how did one get a flexi disc of the Thompson Twins adventure game? Surely it wouldn't fit on the shelf of 1984 Boots or W.H. Smith's next to the Night Law or Elite tape cassettes. No sirree. If you wanted to play the Thompson Twins adventure, you had to purchase issue 36 of Computer and Video Games, and either mail order your free Commodore 64 flexi disc, or if you're a Spectrum owner, you lucky boy, gently, and I mean gently now, you don't want to tear the cover, remove the sellotape from the front of the magazine's cover, and you've got your flexi disc right there in your hands in 1984. That's one up for you, Mr. Spectrum owner, over your Commodore 64 brethren. Commodore 64 owners, just sit there, wait around a little while, wait for your dog to bark out its protective warning of the invasion of the post people, and then you can claim your flexi disc. Now, I know one thing, that a vinyl does not fit in a tape deck. This would be almost exactly like trying to get an Indian elephant to mate with a chihuahua. At least one of these things is going to get broken real bad, and no one will be satisfied with the results. The solution is to either connect your record player to the EAR input on your Spectrum, or you can just do a bit of legal piracy and copy the record to a tape. Yarg! Legal piracy. Sailing the legal seas. Yarr. Now, the purpose of all this free game chicanery was twofold. It was a test run for a series of Thompson Twins games. These were hinted at during gameplay on the Thompson Twins adventure, but ultimately never released or developed further. Secondly, if you finished the game and found the secret of the Doctor's Potion between the magazine's release in early October and November the 16th, you were entered into an exclusive competition to meet the group after seeing one of their musical performances.
Hi, it's the Thompson Twins here.
I'm Alana.
I'm Joe. And I'm Tom, and you're listening to the computer game version of Doctor Doctor.
It's a pop music adventure all about us, with lots of prizes for the first people to solve the puzzles and phone computer and video games with the answers.
We've got t-shirts, albums, posters, and for the first person to solve the adventure, 2 tickets around next concert and an invitation backstage after the show so that we can congratulate you in person. Hey!
Commodore 64 owners were obviously given a bit of leeway in case the dog bit the postman and the postman refused to come back. Now, I can only imagine how awkward some of these prize winners' meetings were, as you need a special kind of mentality to figure out some of the game's more tricky puzzles. It's a typical text adventure in terms of commands. East, west, south, north, in, out, up, down, you shake it all about. Other directional options with inspect, look, inventory, read, take and dig being the main useful verbs. The plot revolves around the 3 Thompson twins, triplets, tasked with gathering the required ingredients for the Doctor from the Doctor Doctor song. and so he can make a potion. Obviously the order from GlaxoSmithKline didn't come from the pharmacy, and Uncle Nigel won't be getting the poultice for his hemorrhoids unless the Thompson twins sort this out. These ingredients are gathered from numerous places, such as the beach, caves, forests and roadsides. When you're done, you return the potion to the eponymous Doctor from the Doctor song, who rather unhelpfully for the elderly, asthmatics or disabled, has his surgery on top of a mountain. After that, the game is done. Get that code, claim your chance at an unforgettable encounter with the hottest band of 1983. I used a complete guide because I am terrible at text adventure games, and the game wrapped up in just over 20 minutes. Mind you, left to my own devices, I'd be sat there like a dribbling wreck weeks later, covered with hair, snot, sweat and fat, twitching and unusual, because this game's puzzles are very weird and esoteric. How do you know where to dig in certain places? I don't know. I'm pretty sure a map would be required for most people setting out on their own. It's not a particularly Thompson Twins related either, other than the band standing there like three fancy 1980s vases at all times, and the erstwhile Doctor of course is there, and though I'm not a particular aficionado of text adventures, I have seen them done better than this, both from a gameplay and a presentation point of view. That said, it was a freebie, and I think it's a very interesting way to run a competition entry, and I think we can all get behind that kind of innovation. Perhaps Ariana Grande could do something similar. Now, if you're a real fan, little 10-year-old girl standing there, well, you'll just have to figure out how to play a vinyl on a ZX Spectrum and play an esoteric, confusing, and sometimes utterly baffling text adventure. I'm pretty sure at the end of that process, Ariana Grande would end up surrounded by 4 or 5 socially awkward 50-year-old men who have no idea what they're doing there, what her music sounds like. She looks kind of pretty, but she's a bit young. And perhaps that's why they shouldn't do that at all. Yeah, don't expect this to happen again. So here we are, the game of the band that had by far the most iconic t-shirt of the 1980s. Sorry, Fat Willie Surf Shack. Frankie says relax. And what a game it is too. Probably the best I've covered in this musician series so far, despite not featuring the band very much at all. But before we get to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the game, let's talk about Frankie Goes to Hollywood, the band. What a novel idea. Formed in Liverpool and comprised of guitarist Brian Nash, bassist Mark O'Toole, drummer Peter Gill, and vocal duo Paul Rutherford and Holly Johnson, Frankie Goes to Hollywood's rise wasn't just meteoric. It was Kuiper Beltic. If you know what that means, well done, you big space nerd. They were the second band in history to have 3 debut number 1s, preceded only by fellow Liverpudlian band, wait for it, Jerry and the Pacemakers. Were you expecting someone else? And they were only superseded by the Spice Girls, who we might have covered recently. Is there a link up there? Oh my god, there is. And yeah, they preceded it with about 6. So this was despite Mike Reed, the famous Radio 1 DJ's successful attempt to get the band's signature debut single Relax banned from the BBC airwaves. But the controversy from that promptly led to the song squatting filthily atop the top 40 for 5 weeks, taunting poor old Mike from up high by flashing its sexually charged lyrical scrotum at his dumb, numpty, puritanical face. Take that, Mike. The band and Mike, though, well, they annulled their feud soon after, with Mike providing a voiceover for an advert for them, so no hard feelings. Mike, as we know, would go on to have an embarrassing interview with Chevy Chase, sing an even more embarrassing song at a UKIP conference, and star in the Spectrum game Mike Reed's Pop Quiz, which you can see here. Frankie Goes to Hollywood took their name from an old copy of the New Yorker magazine, which had the moniker as the headline for an article about smooth-vocaled warbler and mafioso chum Frank Sinatra. And they weren't just a flash in the pan, well, initially. They built on the success of the decidedly homoerotically videoed Relax with the equally anthemic and bombastic Two Tribes, which, I swear if you don't like, you can't be allowed out alone, as you'll probably try and plant your money like seeds in the park to grow money trees and try and clean any windows with your tongue. They followed that up with The Power of Love. Not the Huey Lewis one from Back to the Future, but the slow-paced but effective love ballad. A song which became a staple of those god-awful Christmas albums on the account of it being released in December and having the birth of Jesus in the video. Not literally, I meant the nativity. You don't see old miracle trousers crowning out of the Virgin Mary or anything. That would be weird. With debut album Welcome to the Pleasure Dome proving to be a certifiable hit, the band quickly discovered that it was difficult to replicate that awesomeness of their debut and released a less flamboyant effort in the album Liverpool, which eventually saw frontman Holly Johnson leave for that old chestnut, the old musical differences. Some naughty legal shenanigans involving record contracts, and separately a very strange American imposter group led by a man claiming to be Holly Johnson's brother, and they added to the decline of the band. And despite several attempts to reform throughout the intervening years, it's now unlikely we will ever see a full-strength lineup of Frankie Goes to Hollywood reform to record new material. What cannot be denied, though, is that initial impact, nor the sheer quality pop of the Welcome to the Pleasure Dome album. It is an absolutely gilded standard 80s LP, and I urge you to go and listen to it. It is this album on which Denton Designs' Frankie Goes to Hollywood is designed around. Using the band's imagery, slogans and music as its core, the objective in the game is to explore the town of Mundainesville, apparently a washed out town near Liverpool, and find the access to the mysteriously enticing Pleasure Dome. The Pleasure Dome, eh? If it's halfway as good as Blackpool Pleasure Beach, well, our game protag is in for a treat. Sticks of rock, fat men in kiss me quick hats, all blimey, can't beat a bit of that. As a side note, I can't seem to find Mundainesville on Google Maps. Is it near Birkenhead? Or Birkenhead, if the locals were to say it. Please don't drop me as a subscriber if you're from Liverpool. I have family up there, they love me dearly, and I have visited the city many times and do indeed love it. Even the bit where they filmed This Morning, but don't anymore. Released on the big 3 8-bit formats by Ocean in 1985, you're tasked with turning your avatar into a full person. If you're not a full person, well, the Pleasure Dome has a strict non-half person policy. To become this full person, you need to fill the 4 separate attribute bars to 100%. These bars represent sex, war, love and faith, which can be filled with a variety of methods, from taking pills to feeding cats milk to playing a variety of simple yet well incorporated mini games, 10 of them to be exact. You explore several streets and houses within Mundainesville in search of the mystical Pleasure Dome, looking for the entrances to the mini games and using the objects you pick up along the way. There's no way to die as such, but you can fail if you use the objects in the wrong manner, as it will make it impossible to fill those 4 bars. Look, that one spunk. The way you access the mini games, where most of the bar filling points can be accrued, is by using objects in certain rooms, such as putting VHS tapes into televisions. This will open up a little window on the screen, like you've opened up a little browser on top of another one. Walk into that and you're taken to the minigame. I like this, it's pretty neat, And who doesn't want to play a spitting Ronald Reagan head in a breakout clone, eh? I personally have waited for this exact opportunity to play Ronald Reagan as a spitting head in a breakout clone since I first laid eyes on him. Other games include trying to bounce a pill through a tiny hole with your head, which I can inform you, as a concerned parent, is exactly how the young people take their Mary Jane pills. So watch your children if you're a good parent, like I am. You can also protect Merseyside from some very late and pretty lost German bombers and wander around in a bland maze, like a trip to a large local hospital, and who doesn't enjoy doing that? Also involved is a fascinating murder mystery that you have to investigate in order to further your pleasure dome penetration attempts. It's a very important part of the game, this, and you must make sure you do it and guess accurately. I like this bit of the game quite a bit. Though it's one of those 8-bit games that is initially utterly baffling, what with it not being a shoot 'em up or a platformer, which are easy to access, it doesn't have a lot to do with the band either, but it is a brilliantly creative use of the license, and it is a solidly varied game to boot. It is genuinely good and a very, very interesting game. But what did the gaming press think of it? Well, they pretty unanimously loved it, which is very rare for any type of license, let alone one of those based on a band. Crash gave it the coveted Crash Smash, accompanied with a 94%, saying that the graphics are very imaginative and that this is a highly innovative arcade adventure that you must not be without. Zap loved it like they were married to Scarlett Johansson herself, with a gold medal and a stonking 97%. I don't think I've ever had a score on any of my channel's games as high as that. They put forward that it was a tough and pleasurable challenge in finding your personality. Amstrad Action, they weren't quite as keen, but they still liked the game quite a bit. They gave it an 83. And offered that as more and more elements of the game are discovered, it is very difficult to stop trying to be a real person, and you could find yourself playing for many hours at a time. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is the mark of a good game. All those unanimously good reviews. It's another winner for Denton Designs, like When Time Stood Still and Great Escape. But it makes me upset that they never got that Transformers game right, because that is the game I wanted most as a child, and when I played it, had some good ideas, but it was poorly delivered. You can see the video if you tap the link there. That's the one game, though, I wanted them to get right, and I could guess I should just let it go, and maybe Frankie would advise me to relax. That's it. On first inspection, Shaky the Game made it like a strange choice to launch this 3-game series to celebrate Christmas 2020. It's not very festive at all. However, can you imagine Christmas without its music? Can you imagine, let's say, Star Wars, Indiana Jones or Superman without their score by the peerless John Williams? They'd instantly be lesser movies. They'd lose something. They'd lose quite a lot, actually. Christmas is the same, for better or worse. Without those same 30 or so songs played on loop, Christmas would be just a weird cold time where everyone lost their minds and dressed their house like Danny LaRue, dragged an old tree indoors, and wasted their savings buying tat that their friends don't want or need, in the name of the womb springing of a magic 2,000-year-old baby. I mean, it is still that, but it would be a bit quieter and a lot less atmospheric. Some people love Christmas music. The other people work in retail. Here's me cursing Shaky Stevens himself during an overnight shift at 4 a.m, for example.
Shut up, Shaking Stevens. It's 4:30 in the morning. I cannot cope with your joviality.
Whamageddon is a game you'll always lose in early November if you work in retail. Shaky Stevens had a brilliantly successful pop career and managed to release a Christmas song in the golden era for new Christmas songs that lasted from the mid-70s to the mid-1990s. Whilst the likes of Jingle Bell Rock and White Christmas and Christmas carols, of course, get a lot of airplay, there seemed to be a new thirst for a 20-year period for new Christmas songs that would prove to be certified seasonal money spinners for the likes of Slade, Wizard and Shaky Stevens here. You don't need a retirement plan if you've released Merry Christmas Everyone. That cash caravan of Crimbo seemed to close after Mariah Carey caterwauled her warbling cacophony in 1994. Newer songs, well, they're either not being written or they don't seem to make the grade in terms of being perennial favourites. The familiarity of Christmas, the Groundhog Day clad in garish tinsel, keeps these old songs alive like musical vampires who feed on festivities. Shaky Stevens had success before Merry Christmas Everyone, though. I don't want to downplay his achievements. A Welsh singer-songwriter with a taste for rock and roll sounds from the 1960s. Well, he was actually the biggest selling UK singles artist in the 1980s. The guy knew how to market nostalgia, clearly. Charting 33 times and topping those charts 4 times with Green Door, Oh Julie, This Old House and of course Merry Christmas Everyone. Shaky did pretty well for himself despite being an Elvis Presley replica that you buy on wish.com. It sort of looks and sounds like the original, but it's just a bit inexplicably shoddy. And, by the way, his real name is Michael Barrett. Where does Stevens come in? If you wanted to indicate that you gyrate in an alliterative way, sir, you'll have to go with Moving Michael or Bobbin Barrett. I'm sorry, those are the rules that I've just made up this second. Regardless of his devil-may-care nomenclature, Shaky Stevens decided to put a small, poorly programmed and barely playable maze game at the end of his 1983 album, The Bop Won't Stop. Well, I say he decided, but his little audio intro suggests he hasn't got much interest in the subject matter itself.
Hi, this is Shaky. If you've got a Sinclair Spectrum 48K computer, why don't you try my game? The program follows shortly. If you haven't, please fast forward to the end of the tape so that you can listen to the album again. It's late.
A 48K, eh? Unfortunately for Commodore 64 owners, his album didn't come in different formats, and so they were denied access to this audio-visual delight. Shaky is a Spectrum exclusive, much like Breath of the Wild is an exclusive on the Nintendo Switch, only not really like that at all. At all. The game begins with a simple text screen with Shaky asking you to drive him to a vampire's house while dodging a pair of giant bats who can apparently rip the car apart in order to bite the pair of you. I'll tell you this much for nothing, I'd totally go and watch a Shaky Stevens Vampire Hunter movie. I might not enjoy it while I'm watching it, but I love that concept and I'd definitely be excited to see it even if I don't enjoy it while I'm watching it. He also promises you that if you do well enough at the game, he will reward you. And that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? It turns out just to be a screenshot of a gold or silver disc, so don't get too excited. It's not like a special prize like the Thompson Twins did with their freebie game, where you got to meet them. The text in this game is written very strangely, but the reasons for that is that it incorporates a lot of Shaky song titles, but also the game was a rushed afterthought as well. In fairness, Coder's Olympic software had never actually programmed a game before or since. This game is Olympic software's entire legacy, and it's more Eric the Eel than Michael Phelps in Olympic terms then. The game takes its inspiration from one of Sega's earliest efforts, Head On, which had you evading oncoming cars as you collected dots in a maze. Head On, if you're wondering, actually predated Pac-Man at dot collecting in cramped mazes. While that game allowed you to move between maze passageways and accelerate, which gave you a little bit of an extra dimension of strategy, Shaky only allows you two controls, those being in and out of the maze, which means you can't time a quick burst of speed to pass a wandering bat. Your first few goes will see you lose lives a lot, and then you'll notice something. The bats always move in the exact same path. At that point, the game becomes trivially easy, and you'll rack up vampire house visits like they're going out of fashion, which, as no one talks about Twilight anymore, I think that vampires now are out of fashion again. It doesn't matter how many times you clear the level, those flying rodents will just still patrol the same streets in the same order until you get bored and decide to commit vampiricide by steering into one of them. It won't be very long. When you do, no doubt yours and Shaky's heroic deeds will see you grace the high score table, which is accompanied by this delightful noise. And maybe a gold or silver disc if you're super lucky. Ooh, goody goody gumdrops. Aside from a few bips and bops, that high score sound is one of the few noises in the game, which means we're denied a 48k equivalent of This Old House or Merry Christmas Everyone. There is very little in the way of much else at all, really. All you do is confuse some very dim bats, though you can increase the difficulty of the game by selecting 1 to 5 on the title screen. This basically just speeds it up bit by bit until its woody controls render it completely impossible. The bats still flutter down the same aisles, no matter what the difficulty level, like a parent looking for a toddler's lost shoe in Tesco. There are no reviews available, which shouldn't really come as a huge surprise, as Shaky the game wasn't released in the traditional manner. Perhaps the best way to look at this is that it is a terrible game, as bad as anything I've played on this channel, be that EastEnders or Alf Wiedersehen Pet, but it's not a commercial release. It's more of a freebie, a curio, a Christmas gift, if you will. And from that point of view, it's nice, isn't it? It's like many Christmas gifts, it's the thought that counts. Please don't buy me any more toffee or links though. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not really a fan of Christmas songs, and not just for their ubiquitous nature. They don't represent any sort of Christmas that I've ever had. I've never broken up with a heroin addict in New York. I've never dropped Rehypno in a girl's drink while telling her it's too cold for her to go home, or ridden in one or even multiple horse sleighs. And for the many Christmas songs that have snow in them, well, it hasn't snowed down my way on Christmas Day since the very early 80s. I tell you what, give me a song about arguing about politics, or the farting shame of overeating while sitting in the glow of a Christmas tree lights. Until then, here's to Merry Christmas Everyone, a song that gave me a very tenuous review for my month of Christmas specials. Paul McCartney, eh? Forever pulling off that V for victory symbol with his fingers and doing the disgraceful thing of visibly ageing in front of us over the past 50 to 60 years. How dare he? Will he outlast Ringo, or have they formed a pact to go out together, perhaps under the wheels of a talking steam train? Ringo's got connections after all. Both Beatles feature in this, the movie game adaptation of Give My Regards to Broad Street, and they were in a band or something as well. Give My Regards to Broad Street was a 1984 musical directed by Peter Webb and starring Starr, McCartney and Brian Brown, and really this could equally have been on an episode of Games Based on Flop Movies, as Give My Regards to Broad Street absolutely tanked at the box office. From its $9 million budget, Broad Street scraped back just $1.4 million. Ouch. The movie finds Paul, Ringo, and Paul's wife of the time, Linda, sadly departed, playing fictional versions of themselves as they chase across London trying to prevent some of Paul's master tapes that have gone missing getting bootlegged, and Paul's record company then getting taken over in the process. It's reliant on the album selling because the Beatles famously were really unsuccessful, and therefore Paul McCartney obviously has no money at all to put up to save his record company. It was also the first time the Frog song was shown to the public, as it was presented as a pre-film short. Thank God for that, eh? Bomb, bomb, bomb. Oh, I'm getting flashbacks to my Rupert the Bear episode. Yeah, you got to get those cheap links in when you can. The soundtrack to the film did considerably better than the movie itself, but the film, it was a big critical failure as well as a commercial one. Now, I could talk in depth about the Beatles and Paul McCartney's part in that band, but come on, if you don't know who they are, I don't think you would be watching, as you probably have no idea what a computer or a phone is. It's the Beatles. He was okay after he left the Beatles. Wings were obviously a fairly decent band, you know, Mulligan Tyre and that song they did for the James Bond, what was it? Live and Let Die, wasn't it? Yes, that was a blooming good song, wasn't it? A memorable one, perhaps one of the best Bond songs. But yes, I think in recent times, I think age catches up with every musician, and their stuff they do when they get beyond a certain age, it's just not that memorable, is it? Contentious, but there we are. Instead, let's go straight to the video game released on both the Commodore 64 and the ZX Spectrum in 1985. The game was published by Argus Press Software, who would later go on to become Grand Slam. It was programmed by Concept Software Limited, who you might know from their sparse, atmospheric and underrated classic Alien adaptation in 1984. If you've not played the game that Concept made about Alien, I suggest you change that, because it is really good. It's sort of like Among Us, but without the multiplayer aspect, crap graphics, and an alien from their movie Alien. Funnily enough, it wasn't the first game based on the Beatles either. Yeah, even back in 1985, there was another game based on the Beatles, The Beatle Quest, as it's called, preceded Give My Regards to Broad Street by a couple of months, and was a text adventure set in the space year of 2953, with you as the keeper of the archives of ancient Earth knowledge. That's a job I quite like. There follows an adventure full of Beatles lyrics as you look for clues about the four kings of EMI. The Beatle Quest, made using a program called The Quill, came out on the same formats courtesy of Number 9 software, and was about as authorised as Prince Andrew as a professional chaperone for teenagers. Back to our main focus, as we should always be, rather than being a meandering Susan like we are, and let's give my regards to Broad Street. You, as a 43-year-old Paul McCartney, have from 9 a.m. until midnight on Saturday to mix together No More Lonely Nights. Otherwise, the group's backer will eat 82 Labrador puppies in front of Linda and make her cry into her corn snacks. You do this by charging around a geographically kinda accurate London, and by rounding up your 7 band members, then getting them back to Abbey Road, and then having them record their part of the song. It helps if, like a cabbie with the knowledge, you know where Elephant and Castle is compared to Camden Town, but for those who have never been to that filthy, stinking hive of humanity called London, there's a handy map included. There are clues to where the musicians tend to hang out that are written in their profiles, but it's up to you to head to the correct tube station or landmark at the right time and then slouch about walking around for them to turn up. And they might well turn up, and won't you be pleased when they do? Most of the screen is taken up by your top-down view of the big smoke and your little McCartney manoeuvred motor in it. It controls a little bit strangely, but it's certainly copable after a couple of minutes. The lower portion of the display has McCartney's Beatles-o-matic tracking device that keeps tabs on his pal's vague whereabouts. This surveillance technology seems a little bit off morally, but it'll help our vegetarian food-hawking rock legend in his quest for pop dominance, so who are we to complain about it? Just mere mortals. There are obstacles in our way, such as thugs and London traffic, that will do their best to ruin your musical mission and put a delay in your recording revelry, so steer clear of any trouble. If you arrive too early to a destination, the enemy of all mortal central London men will arrive in the form of a traffic warden, and you'll be clamped and inconvenienced further still. Doesn't he know that Paul McCartney has a forgettable soundtrack album to record? God damn it, sir! Give My Regards to Broad Street is certainly an interesting title. It's a tough challenge. It's okay to play. The graphics are above average on both formats. The music is decidedly interesting on the spectrum. But it's passable on the old Commodore 64. It is a commendable effort, really, Give My Regards to Broad Street. Even beyond the scale of London and its many locales, there might not be a lot to the game, but it is a collection of very strong, brave ideas. Ideas, of course, being a thing that Paul McCartney gets more and more sap from him the longer he spends away from his dear departed friends John Lennon and George Harrison. I kind of like Give My Regards to Broad Street, despite it not being quite the sum of its parts. But let's see what the magazines thought. The June 1985 issue of CMVG praised Broad Street, giving it an 8 out of 10 and saying that the McCartney game should be a top 10 hit. Commodore User warned against the lasting interest of Broad Street, but said it's still good value, a package at $7.95 in their April 85 edition. They gave it an 8 out of 10. Zap weren't so keen in their May 1985 edition. They gave it a 65 and said poor control and high difficulty damage the game's feel. Plenty of the game there though once you're into it. It has some very nice features. On the Spectrum side of journalism, well, Crash's issue 17 gave it an 81% and claimed it was an involving game that is both novel and well designed. Your Spectrum thought you should give it a miss though when they covered it in their issue 16. It might offer a painless way for prospective cabbies to learn about London, but if this is how pop stars spend their time, I think I'll hang up my guitar. A 2 out of 5 from them. Sinclair User praised the programmers but were dismissive of the plot, believing it could have done with a bit more detail than just lost friends and musical notes. They awarded it a 3 out of 5. And that's it for Give My Regards to Broad Street and its ridiculously long title. A game of decent ideas, but average execution. But also a game with more streets than you could shake a Heather Mills artificial leg at. Michael Jackson. He was, and I think it's fair to say this, a strange duck. In 1988, he decided to make what was essentially a really long music video lasting 93 minutes. And then he went and released it into cinemas and onto VHS. It was right bloody quirky, as they no doubt would say in Doncaster, and the resultant movie, if you could even call it that, was called Moonwalker. And that movie, Moonwalker, would go on to have 3 different computer and video games. The first one was released by US Gold, and it was a 4-level multi-part action game on the 8 and 16-bit micros. The second game was the System 18 hardware isometric 3-player jaunt through the movie's locales, and the final one was the most famous version of all, the Mega Drive and Master System version, a Shinobi-esque side-scroller. However, first things first, let's deal with the home computer version, shall we? It was the first one released, touching the shelves of Boots, W.H. Smith, Woolworths and all the other good computer game stores in the year of our Lord 1989. I think it's a good idea to cover this one first, because like the sprouts on a Christmas dinner plate, it gets them out the way with, as they're the worst part of it. The arcade, if you like, is the roast potatoes, and the Sega versions are the pigs in blankets, I guess. The first game released related to the Moonwalker license was the version for the microcomputers released by US Gold. Michael Jackson's Moonwalker was developed by Emerald Software, an Irish firm who also programmed the terrible Running Man movie adaptation. That is not a good sign if you've played The Running Man. However, don't worry, it's not that bad. Moonwalker was released on the Amiga, the Atari ST, the Amstrad, MS-DOS, Commodore 64, the MSX and the Spectrum in the last couple of months of 1989. The game was broken up into 4 sections based on scenes from the movie, I guess. All the levels are identical on all the formats, with just the usual graphical and audio differences coming into effect. The first 2 levels are fairly similar. It turns out among Jackson's many peculiarities is that he's a bit of a furry, and so he must traipse a Hollywood studio in search of parts of a rabbit costume. It will only end up with him leaving Jilter on the soft felt of a fox's face. No, apparently I've got that wrong. He's actually using the rabbit to disguise himself from his legion of fans that won't leave him alone, so he can live a standard Michael Jackson day of being all socially awkward and hanging out with 11-year-olds. He also needs to collect film props because the gaffer, the rigger, the best boy, the key gripper, or whoever's in charge of props must have done a bunk on filming day. Once he's got his rabbit costume together, he can mount his motorbike and ride to the next level. Being a bunny on a bike forms the basis of that next level as you tear up the streets of the town of Michaelsville looking absolutely ridiculous. Michael's doing his concerned citizen bit here as he's driving over loose packets of cocaine that have been left around by a movie villain drug baron. I don't know why he's left them about. I mean, it seems a bit sort of, careless. They're just on the street. He's not a very good drug baron, is he? And while we're on the subject, if you're going to be running over cocaine packets and being all for the kids and looking after them, you should put a helmet on, mate, because a rabbit mask offers poor protection should you fall off your bike. If you're going to be doing the public service bit and teaching children right from wrong, put on a helmet, not a rabbit mask. Jesus. As well as running over cocaine, you'll be trying to find some magic crystals that will enable Michael to turn from a bunny on a motorcycle into an amazing silver space car that can fly over barriers. I think it's safe to assume that Michael had a fair amount of creative control over this movie, as it makes no bloody sense at all. Once that's all done, you can go on to the next level and move away from these weird maze stages. Both of the first 2 levels are sort of a bit like Rally X, I guess, just featuring standard controls and unspectacular gameplay. The dots on the map that are stationary are the collectibles. The dots that are mobile are the enemies. And boy, are the enemies absolutely relentless and driven once they've laid eyes upon you. If they can see you, unless you can befuddle them with a sneak down an alleyway, you're dead. There's no defensive weaponry or moves. It's evade or die, and you will probably die. It is very hard to shake them once they've got their eyes on you. I would edit in my multiple deaths along with some AVGN grunts and curses, but I'm being very lazy today. The lack of defence is compensated somewhat by the game giving you a generous amount of lives in which to complete the level with. On to the next level, where Michael enters Club 30, the smooth criminal accompanied scene, probably the most famous scene of the movie, as it was used in all the trailers, all the advertising, and of course as the basis of the most famous version of Moonwalker, the computer game, that being the Mega Drive one. In that game, Jackson uses magic. In this one, Jackson sods that all off and picks up a Tommy gun, and Funk walks about peppering all kinds of Dick Tracy lookalike gangster dickheads with bullets in a Cabal like blast 'em up. It's not fantastic, this section, but it's not too bad. I'd say it's probably the game's highlight. You pop felons as they appear in windows and jump about collecting more ammo. It controls okay, looks okay, and it's, well, okay. Level 4 is that level again, but much worse. You're a big robot now, although actually it's probably nicer to describe you as an immobile turret on a single screen. You do exactly what you did before, but you can't move, and you occasionally get accosted by a giant ceiling penis that fires a heat ray at poor old Robo Michael. I'm starting to think, is this level a cry for help? Once you blow up the roof wang, he turns back into a space car, flies off into the stratosphere, and well, that's the game done. Hammersmith's most raucous sons may no longer be a thing, on the account of its most famous lineup quite literally no longer being a thing. But they sure rocked hard during their breath inhalation days. And in this game, they rocked the chops and chins of various hoodlums and ne'er-do-wells too. It's sort of a dad rock double dragon, and it is Motorhead, the game. And I'm all here for it. So who are these black-clad ruffians? Let me tell you, son. Lemmy, that iconic frontman with the distinctive mutton chops, a love for SS uniforms, and a face so warty a blind person could fall asleep while reading it in bed, was already quite the known quantity before Motorhead. He was the raspy vocals for Hawkwind way back when. Have you heard classic single Silver Machine and thought that sounds like Lemmy? That's because it is. He actually got the name Motorhead from a song he wrote for Hawkwind about an amphetamine user. It was either that or Lemmy was going to use the name Bastard, but was advised against it for airplay reasons on things like Radio 1. I mean, they didn't just let anyone on Top of the Pops, did they? Yeesh. The first lineup was Lemmy, Lucas Fox and Larry Wallace, who launched their career with a press release that insisted if they moved next door to you, the music would be so loud your lawn would die. That's a hell of a mission statement. The first attempt at an album was rejected by United Artists, and so it was back to the drawing board for Lemmy, and well, as he came back with what's known as the classic lineup, that being Fast Eddie Clarke and Phil Taylor aka Filthy Animal, I'd say he did some much better planning this time around. In this incarnation they released their most seminal work. The albums Motorhead, Overkill, Bomber, Ace of Spades and Iron Fist were released during this period, along with one of the greatest live albums of all time, that being No Sleep Till Hammersmith. They were the precursors of the British metal boom, blending in hard rock and roll with a punk attitude. Despite a few lineup changes here and there, Motorhead ended up releasing over 20 studio albums, along with a ton of compilations, EPs and live albums. And if you're aware of WWE, you'll know that Triple H absolutely loves Motorhead. Lemmy, the warty-faced frontman, was indeed the embodiment of Motorhead, and without him there simply is no Motorhead. So when he tragically passed in 2015, then current members Mickey D and Phil Campbell disbanded the group immediately, and so it has remained ever since. This, of course, is all very sad, and Lemmy used to hate sadness and cynicism, so let's instead look at footage of Lemmy punching people in the face and hitting them over the head with guitars, which I think he would support. Virgin Games released Motorhead in 1992 for the Amiga and Atari ST, and it was developed by Kaitsu Software. Richard Costello, the programmer, apparently reused the engine that the home computer conversions of Golden Axe were based on to make this beat-em-up. The storyline has Lemmy waking up from a self-induced chemical coma to find that several gangs with different musical tastes have kidnapped Mr. Kilminster's roadies and his bandmates. Lemmy is not a man best known for his calm and collected nature, and so decides rather than take the sensible option of calling the appropriate authorities, and he's just simply going to remove teeth with his knuckles to solve the issue himself. Gangs themed after hip-hop, rave, punk, country and karaoke are all things that will only encourage Lemmy to get his mad up, and up his mad doth get. While it's fitting that these bands of goons each get their own levels, along with themed backgrounds and music, it is a shame we don't get much in the way of 16-bit interpretations of the classic Motorhead oeuvre, nor a lot of the classic album artwork from them as levels to play in. I'd have kind of liked to have seen Lemmy battle demons in a hellscape to a metal soundtrack, much like he did with the aid of Jack Black in Brutal Legend, but just in a 2D environment. But that's more of a personal preference thing, and it's not a terrible idea to have these other genres as varied enemy sets. I'm sure if you were a teenage metaler in the 1990s, hitting a chav over the head with a guitar would have given you some sort of cathartic enjoyment. In between each level we get rock and roll themed bonus stages with various debauched acts, including picking up groupies, trashing hotel rooms, riding motorbikes, bullying hippies and downing beers in a Tapper style minigame. They sound fun, but these are extremely short and not massively clear to work out how you play them, and you're just sort of thrown into it. With that said, there are a lot of them and they're very different, and they do punctuate the levels with something a bit different each time. As previously mentioned, the core of the game is the home version of Golden Axe, and the moveset is fairly similar to that game, with charging headbutts, swinging axes, as in the guitar kind of axe, and a weaponised belt similar to that of the Sega game's Dragonfire attacks. The AI of the enemies, for what it's worth, is similar to that of Golden Axe as well, with enemies attempting to surround you, and you may well have to get rid of them by using some of the game's version of magic, that being a deadly guitar lick or a summoned demon, which can be used after collecting enough tokens. You can find other power-ups, including beer, which restores your health, and a whiskey in a jarro, which is a nice nod to contemporaries like the Pogues or Thin Lizzy, who had released that famous song previous to this game coming out. Most backgrounds are not interactive. You can't smash up any barrels or collect any drain pipes to pick up. And what kind of beat 'em up doesn't have a drain pipe with a little bit on the end that you can't pick up and hit someone with? Surely someone must have made a mistake here. Out of the two versions, I'd argue that the Amiga one is the better one. It runs a little bit more smoothly for me than the Atari ST. So I'd suggest if you wanted to play a version of Motorhead, it's the Amiga one that you should probably go to. But should you? Well, maybe. As a beat 'em up on a computer, it's fine, it's no Renegade on the Spectrum, but having all the attacks mapped to one button is an exercise in frustration, especially as it's a game that features environments where you have to jump over some chasms at different points. Yeesh. It's not a problem that's easy to deal with when you're dealing with that sort of baked-in computer joystick issue of just having one button. But there are games that have managed to deal with it in the past. Going back to it after playing a classic beat-em-up on the Super Nintendo or the Mega Drive, well, it's a little bit jarring and it feels like you're trying to force a butt plug into an antagonised cat. Motorhead is an okay 16-bit brawler. It looks okay. It plays okay. There should have been some better decisions made, perhaps, with the music choices, but they are the choices they made, and it carries off the choices quite well. Amiga Power gave it a 71 in issue 21. They said it's a perfectly professional and fun game that's great if you enjoy hacking and slashing, with a few little diversions thrown in for good measure. Amiga Format gave it a 76 in their issue 42. They say its tongue-in-cheek attitude saves it from being just another beat-em-up. The March 93 issue of ST Action gave Motorhead a 68%, and they told us it's an okay game to return to every now and then. So that's Motorhead the game then. It's far from a bomb, but it's no ace of spades. Yeah, that was terrible. Sorry about that. Imagine, if you will, being a Stranglers fan and being the owner of the recently released Spectrum 48K in the year of our Lord 1984. You've just listened to the new album, Oral Sculpture, and upon listening to the last track, you hear this little snippet at the end of the cassette.
Hello, this is Dave Greenfield. This is a taped message from the Stranglers. You have reached the end of the album, Old Sculpture, but not the end of the tape. A high-pitched sound after this message is, in fact, the computer code for an adventure game entitled Oral Quest, specially designed for the 48K Spectrum computer. We hope you have as much excitement, adventure, and pleasure as we had creating it for you. Good luck. Goodbye.
A whole game at the end of your album with this lâché, really spoiling us, Jean-Jacques Bernal. And well, we love a surprise, don't we? Okay, maybe not when you go to the doctors for a routine checkup and they look really concerned and they close the door and ask you to sit down and they tell you something about your life that's going to change it forever.
Don't you go too far.
But most of the time, we really like surprises, don't we? So how did this free game about the Stranglers come about then? Well, first up, who are the Stranglers? They are a Guildford in Surrey formed rock band from the height of the mid-70s punk scene era. The Stranglers are a band that evolved too over their 5 decades, scoring 23 top 40 singles. There's absolutely no chance that you don't know a Strangler song. Golden Brown, Peaches, Always the Sun, No More Heroes, they were a hit machine. Of the original lineup, only Jean-Jacques Bernal remains in the band. Jet Black, Hans Warmling and Dave Greenfield, who you heard in that little audio clip by the way, have all passed. Vocalist Hugh Cornwell left the band in 1990, and they have said that as of late 2021 that their last tour is in the past. They are, though, one of the greatest, most enduring bands from the punk era and pretty damn cool to boot. In 1984, though, they released Oral Sculpture, their 8th studio album, which was seen as a calmer effort from their more aggressive long players from previous, and that reached number 14 in the chart. The biggest single success from Oral Sculpture was the jaunty upbeat Skin Deep, which attained 15th in the top 40. The game itself came about due to keyboardist Dave Grenfell's love of adventure games that he played with his then girlfriend Pam. In a CMVG interview in 1984, Dave revealed that he was a big fan of text adventures, having played The Hobbit, Mountains of Ket and Urban Upstart, among many others. They met up with a chap called Mike Turner, a games designer for Star Dreams, and together they created Oral Quest, using the Quill text adventure creation software based on a concept and scripts by the couple Dave and Pam. The game was given away exclusively with Oral Sculpture on tape cassette, so you wouldn't be able to find this game in the usual games aisle of W.H. Smith's. You'd need to step over to the music section if you wanted to get hold of a copy of this. Giving a game away with a band's album was nothing new. Shaky Stevens did it with the Shaky Game, and the Thompson Twins put the Thompson Twins Adventure onto a vinyl on the front of a magazine. Dave was only too aware of the Shaky Game, which was an extremely basic looking arcade title reviewed a few years back by this very channel. "Let's put it this way," said Dave, smiling. "For Shaky Stevens fans, an arcade game was right. Stranglers fans are thinking people. They wouldn't touch an arcade game." Such shade thrown at Shaky Stevens there. Sadly, David Greenfield succumbed to COVID at the height of the pandemic, but he left behind quite the legacy. Golden Brown, the song that broke the Stranglers into the mainstream, a song beloved by many that you still hear regularly played on the radio. Well, that distinctive sound, that was all Greenfield. Truly a talented man indeed. So we all know it's an adventure game then, but what on earth has it got to do with the Stranglers? And what do you do in it? Well, you are, of all folk, the tour manager of the Stranglers. Your job is to go to various international locales and collect payments from various foreign promoters. Why you didn't get those payments at the time? I don't know. Seems a little bit short-sighted. And these are, of course, pre-internet times, so a polite phone call asking for a bank transfer, that ain't gonna do it. Bloody 80s. Come on, Berners-Lee, get your finger out. But there is another purpose for your international travel. See, some clumsy goit has broken the ear statue that is featured on the front cover of the album, and they've scattered it in the same places that you're going to collect your money from. What you need to do is you need to get the monies and the pieces of the ear statue and reunite them all back in London. The tour manager you play starts atop a ladder painting his house when the phone rings telling him he needs to go and get all the band's money. The lazy ponce start earning your keep. The game takes in places that the Stranglers actually played in, and some of the events and mishaps that befall the tour manager happened to the band themselves. For instance, they had a bit of trouble with the law in France the previous year, and it happens to the protag in the game too. There's a fair amount of humour scattered throughout the game. You'll have to remember to put the paintbrush down or you'll drip all over the place. And there's nice touches for Stranglers fans in the fact that if you go to certain locations, certain musical cues kick in. For instance, when you go down to the beach, a rather beepy rendition of the Peaches' first few notes are played. Other tunes, it can textually appear throughout, and I think that's a nice little treat. There's nothing in the way of graphics aside from the bits of the ear. It's a reasonable challenge, and while the game's lexicon isn't particularly large, it is a freebie game on the end of an album. You can't really complain, like you couldn't do about the Shaky Stevens or Thompson Twins games either. Overall, the puzzles are fairly logical. You can tell that Dave Greenfield and his two other creators are experienced players of text adventures. Is it the best of the 3 freebie Spectrum games that you got with albums? It's better than the Shaky Game, I'll give it that. I'd say the Thompson Twins game, although it's a bit esoteric, probably is the slightly better one out of the 2 text adventures. CMVG said, considering that it's not to be sold as software, the difficulty level is just about right. This could well be the introduction of adventure games to many who have never played one before, or an introduction, of course, of the Stranglers music to adventure gamers. So yeah, I'd say it's more golden than brown.
You've made it to the end of the video. Well done, you. And if you enjoyed this, then next week I'm going to compile all the console games based on musicians videos that I've done so far. So yeah, it'd be unusual to do a collection without Spectrum in it, though. Ooh, will you cope? Will I cope? I probably won't cope. So yes, I'll see you soon. And like, subscribe, and thanks, bye.